1 minute.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Bye-bye. Sounds good. Thanks. Bye.
I'd like to open our meeting of January 26th. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome anyone, there's no one in the audience, but perhaps at home, to our meeting. The public is encouraged to address us, but there's no cards needed because there's nobody here. We will be working on the choice of who we will want for our legal counsel. A letter was sent out and we interviewed the candidates last week, and hopefully we've all had a chance to talk with them individually. Any notes that we make today, in addition to the notes we made back then, do have to be turned in for public records. I would like to sort of do what we've done on the superintendent. Instead of talking about the candidates by name, maybe we number them 1 through 5, and we can use the list that she gave us with the schedule with the prices on it. The last one there needs a correction. We got a letter correcting or updating the price to $2.75 an hour, but limiting to 5% of the average of the last 3 years. I did talk with Linda in Brennan's, Dr. Aspen's office, and it seemed like the hours that were being used were usually sometime between 70 and 100 hours on an average month, but it wasn't all board work. It was also work with the superintendent's committee and also with contracts. And there were several litigation items that the firm did, plus they also farmed some out. So it was a little hard to do apples and apples. But what I'd like to do is perhaps do what we did with the superintendent, go by and perhaps if we can lower the field by asking each member to list their top 3. We don't want names. Use the numbers, and I would say use the numbers on the sheets. On the sheets that was passed out, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if you could give me, so we could perhaps narrow the field when we start our discussions. Yes.
What I would like to do is to go through, the plan was to go through each person. I'd like to just get their choice, their first choice, and their positives. Hopefully, when we get to the end, we will then have a consensus, and then if we not, we can do dialogue at the end. Because this is not a regular invitation to bid, which would just be by low price, this is a request for letter of interest, so you were given the qualifications to review. So what I would like to do as the purchasing director is make sure we go over the fee schedule, because we did ask for that. And then I would like to start with Ms. Ziegler and just go down and ask each person their choice and the reason why.
So you only want the top choice?
I would like to start with that and see what we end up with. We could, by the time we end up with Mr. Edwards, we could end up with a consensus or even a 5-0. I don't think we need to go with 3. We just need to say, what is your choice, what are the reasons why, and then when we get down to Mr. Edwards, we have an idea of what we're looking at, and then can go for further dialogue after that.
What if, after the dialogue, someone wants to change their choice?
Then you can very well change your choice, because
Okay.
some of you may have read something that someone else did not. So as each person rallies for their choice, someone may decide to change their vote or change their selection before you vote. And then hopefully, as Ms. Rose stated, because this is so important, hopefully we can get to that 5-0 or close, so that we have, everybody feels good about the choice that's being made for this very important position.
All right.
Okay?
I'll yield to you then.
All right, so what I want to do is I just want to go over the fee schedule so that everyone has it. While it's not the deciding factor in this, I think it's important to review. I did it in, with the handout you have, is how they presented to you. So on the 29th, your first one that presented was Weiss, Sarasota, Helfman, Cole, and Bierman. They're located in Coral Gables at $265 an hour. Your second presenter was Pearson, Cohen, and Mooney. They're in Lakewood Ranch at $200 an hour. Your third was Wotitsky, Ross, McKinley, and Young. They are located in Punta Gorda, and they are $190 an hour. Chartwell Law was your fourth presenter. They are out of Fort Myers. They are $165 for a partner, $145 for an associate, and $80 for a paralegal. Your last presenter was Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick. They are in Sarasota. And their rates are for Mr. Dugan and Mr. Conley. Mr. Dugan would be your primary, is $275 an hour. Other members would be $325. And this is not to exceed 5% of the average of the last 3 legal amounts charged. Okay? So going forward, and then let's not forget, least of all, Mr. Art Hardy from Eastmore Crawls and DuBose. They are in Sarasota, and Mr. Art Hardy's rate is $175 an hour. Okay, so let's start with Ms. Ziegler, who is your choice and the reasons why.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for all the work you did. I know they take a lot of time, and I also want to thank all of the applicants for their interest. And as you mentioned, this is a very important decision, and I think we had a handful of really viable candidates. For me, when I rank as far as priority, experience was number 1. Certainly, the ability to hit the ground running. I recognize that my first choice was Weiss, Sarasota, Helfman, Cole, and Bierman. And I will say that the concern certainly did arise as far as the location. They addressed that head on as far as that would not be included in the billables from the hourly standpoint. So I just want to make that clear that is not that would not be part of our hourly schedule. From a billable standpoint, and I appreciated the option for once they'll have a flexible approach to their fees. After 3 to 4 months of working with us, we could get a more constant set amount, which I think provides less volatility from a budgeting standpoint. So that is my reasons. I think, again, they illustrated their ability their knowledge of school districts. They certainly handle larger ones as well, and I think they will be a good fit for Sarasota County.
Thank you. Ms. Rose, your choice?
My choice, and I want to start out by also recognizing and thanking you for organizing this and leading us through it. My first choice is number 2, Person, Cohen, and Mooney, Lakewood Ranch, and I'm looking at their legal ability, their ratings and professional ethics, that they have significant government, city, county, and local government law experience, and they are local, and their fees are, in comparison, very reasonable to the other options.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown?
I took number 5 on the list, Shoemaker, because I think they ticked off more of the squares than anyone else. They were local. They've worked with school districts, and they seemed quite willing to work with us, looking at our legal costs and how we do that. And in addition, the training that they do, because I think we're going to need some training on our new policies regarding harassment. And so I thought that they stood out in those areas, but also, I think they were the ones who could tick off most of them. And I like that they proposed, I don't know if they did it totally, but that to review what our costs are, so we have a better understanding what they are, and perhaps come up with a way of billing so that we could all understand this was board work, this was work with the superintendent, this was contract work for the construction department. So we knew where these costs are coming from, because I found it was difficult to get that kind of information the way we are doing it right now. And, being local, they're quite aware of the issues that face the school district, and they've got a horse in the race.
Thank you. Ms. Goodwin?
Again, thanks so much, Tracy, for all that you've done for us in making this easy, if it's really considered easy. I want to thank the 5 individual law firms who have answered the call for us, and there were things that I liked about most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And for me, the only decision was number 5. And here's why. They're local. They understand our work. They have an excellent reputation of doing investigations, for which we seem to have too many. I think that we would be very lucky to have them as our board counsel, and they would have all of the other departments that we look for in the other work that we happen to do. We look at us being almost $1 billion business, and we have to start ramping up our legal counsel and looking like $1 billion business. And I spoke to different individuals that I liked very much, and I thank them for speaking to me and answering many questions about their firms. But we have to start being proactive instead of reactive, and I think for the most part we do react a lot, and we need to build safeguards into our district. And I think with the help of a new legal counsel, notwithstanding the wonderful job that Art Hardy has done for us, but looking at the future, along with our new HR director and that process, which has needed to be filled for some times, I think that we will be in a position to bring the costs down. I think the costs have elevated exponentially, but I want to have somebody that's local, that will be responsive locally. I want someone who can pick up the phone and call other people within the community. And I spoke to a number of individuals about these firms, and the number one reaction that I got was 5-star, and that's what I'm looking for.
Can you give me the name of number 5?
Pardon?
Can you give me the name of number 5? You just said number 5.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick?
Shoemaker Loop, yep.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Edwards?
Well, I hate to throw a fly in the ointment here, but I don't have a number 1 choice. I came to this meeting with an open mind with 2 top contenders, which I was prepared to talk about as to why they were my 2 top contenders. And I really wanted to hear input from my fellow board members regarding that. Because I think that's part of my job, is to take into account what their thoughts are. I'm happy to share that. Along those lines, I agree with everyone's conversation about rates and concerns, but we're looking at dramatic cost per hour. Changes, and so if that's okay with my fellow board members and you, Tracy, for having done such a great job and trying to speed us through this,
If you'd like to give me your 2, that is fine. What are your top 2 that you believe would do the best job for the board?
So I'm speaking from my background, not as an educator, but as an entrepreneur. And my 2 top choices were that we require legal representation from a top-tier firm that is sizable. Somebody that instead of one-off litigations, which is what we've been currently doing through Mr. Hardy, which was a good fit. He was our custom fit, but as our school district has moved into a billion-dollar academic institution, I think it's now time to re-examine the culture and size of firm that makes the most amount of sense, so that upon examining and reviewing how our legal dollars are spent, most of which are spent in litigation, not necessarily the education practice knowledge, but that is crucial, then the litigation piece of it and that in-house ability to keep those legal dollars in-house and become a sizable client to that law firm helps control costs, and we don't become one-offs in different law firms around the state or, in fact, the country as we need it. So that's philosophically where I was coming from. And to start off, I would tell you that it's Weiss Sarasota is number 1, and obviously Shoemaker is number 5, and both of those fit the bill for me in terms of that first off criteria. The second criteria that concerns me is rate, and we all had the opportunity to speak to the law firms individually, which I did do, and which I also said in the public notice the last time we were all together to Mr. DeLeo that I was concerned about his rates, and you look from Mr. Hardy's number to the numbers that were proposed. Even still, and Mr. DeLeo and I had a very really good conversation about trying to bring these numbers down. And one of the other advantages of working with a larger law firm is that they have the ability to offload work, meaning instead of a senior partner doing the work, they can offload it to a less expensive associate and keep going down the line to paralegals. And that is another advantage of a much larger firm. So we can get bigger bangs for our buck on an hourly rate. So, and Mr. DeLeo and I did have extensive conversations with that. Where both of us were concerned, when you're making a good business deal, everybody has to win. There's not a winner or a loser, it's win-win. So where I was concerned was, to Mrs. Brown's point, exactly how do we spend those dollars? How do we review them? Can they bring us advantage to, even though the hourly rate may be higher at the $275, can they bring that overall average down to closer to where Mr. Hardy was just by offloading the work? So we won't know that until we try it out and figure out where we are. And so we talked about a 36-month proposal of keeping apples to apples, trying to stay as close to that average spend, whether in Mr. DeLeo's example, he points out $700,000. I don't know if that's the average spend over the last 5 years, but whatever that number is, trying to get as close to that average spend within 5%. Here's where it changed for me after he and I spoke and the document that I received. And what I received was, and I have it for Tracy highlighted so that when I turn it in for public records, it says, should Schumacher find that it cannot perform these services within the first 24 months at a profit, it reserves the right to demonstrate such facts to the board, which may in its sole which means that Schumacher in its sole and absolute discretion can increase the cap. And here's where I have my problem with that. I have no control over profit. They have fixed costs. All I have control over is revenue into them, and then they have to manage the profit. So that's where I'm very uncomfortable, and I just say that. But all of the things I've heard so far, I like. I even made a statement in our last meeting that we need to get on the other side of this camp with our previous superintendent, and but the more I thought about it, I'm still concerned about that, because if we select that person, are we perpetuating that culture? I don't know. Last but not least, in this particular concern that I have with this firm is I watched Mrs. Rose extremely upset. in having to interact with the person that was selected. And if you look further into the email, it says that we could change that person out. And that is because I asked for it.
What person? If you're referencing me, I'd like to know what person. That is incorrect. I never said that.
I'm not saying
And I
you
don't
did.
have an issue with Mr. Duggan.
Okay.
I can speak for myself. Thank you.
You're very welcome, but I was being considerate. So that if that was an issue as to not select a firm.
It is not an issue.
Okay.
Duggan is not an issue, nor
Okay.
did I ever say that.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm actually speaking out of care. I wasn't suggesting it one way or the other. So having said that, those are my concerns. On the other side of the spectrum, I did send a follow-up email to the other firm and asked them if the $265 was negotiable. And I sent that out on Sunday. I did not receive an answer. I also asked them to confirm that travel time was not going to be billed. And so I just wanted to get my I's and T's dotted from a financial point of view to make sure the same conversation, financial conversation that I had with the other law firm, I felt was fair to have with this one. I did not get a response back. So that's where I'm at, local or otherwise. Here's what I think local. At first, my inclination, for all of the reasons that Mrs. Goodwin said, was to pick that. It was easy. Mr. DeLeo knows our referendum, knows the school district. He loves the school district. He has kids in the school district. Makes perfect sense to me. When I got into kicking the tires and really contemplating about the culture issue and how employees feel, which I did do. I spent a fair amount of time just making phone calls and talking to staff and teachers. I got mixed reviews, quite honestly. So in terms of local, maybe it's an advantage not to be plugged in, not to be a lightning rod, so that's the other piece that where I'm at. And we have an advantage of Zoom. We've all learned to be on Zoom quite effectively. So if instead of Mr. Hardy sitting right next to me, which I enjoy his company, and he and I can read CNN on his computer screen, but it's not essential. But some of those financial questions are still out there for me, and behavior that they didn't answer. So. That's where I'm at, open for discussion. And Mrs. Rose, I am in no intention of speaking for you. I was just being considerate.
Thank you. Please don't speak for me.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. So I'll get Art's opinion on this, but you will go into, after you decide on a firm, you will then go into negotiation with Mr. Hardy and Ms. Brown. So you may even get a better price when you go into negotiation. You may not. And then I do not believe there is any limit. I don't think you put a term limit on the contract if you wanted to have someone for 3 years. Do we have a limit on that,
Well,
Mr. Hardy?
the proposed contract that I gave to the board to look at, and I didn't get any feedback on, really had blanks to fill in for the name and the rate. And my assumption was you were going to be getting information in the submittals and then in the discussions about rate. So those would be plugged in. And you've got that, Tracy's given that to us. With regard to term, I have the contract set up so that it doesn't have a particular term. What's important from my perspective for you is that the board always has the ability to terminate the contract with its attorney, whoever it is. And on the flip side, the attorney also has the ability on reasonable notice, because as we've learned, it takes a little time to turn the battleship here, but on reasonable notice, the attorney can withdraw as well for whatever reason, whether it's cost or otherwise. Now, if you want to have a term in the contract so that the rates are fixed for a period of time, whether it's a year or 2 years, to me, that doesn't matter, because you should always have the ability to get out of the contract, as does the lawyer, again, on reasonable notice. So I don't see that term as a as a big deal. If the lawyer wants to change his or her rates, they're going to need to come back to you to get an amendment to the contract, whether it's in a month or 10 years, because the rates will be fixed in the contract. So that's, I mean, I'm happy to try to answer questions, but that's my thinking on the form of the contract.
Now, Mr. Hardy, I know I talked to you a little bit about the contract and whether or not the current contract, right now, we've got somebody that does workers' comp, and there was something in the contract about not having, for some reason, I must have left it on the table where I was reading last night, not doing any work with negotiating, the union negotiating, and I don't know if we've decided on that or not,
Well,
whether we want them.
Right, and that, basically what I did was, we developed this form of a contract about 4 years ago when there was a conversation with me. Never happened,
Right.
but, and at that time, it was clear I've never had anything to do with workers' comp, and I'm assuming the next person won't either. And then at that point, that's when I was no longer doing the bargaining, and that was an issue, to the board, so I wanted to make that clear. That can come out if, I think, I don't know what exact work the new lawyer's firm is going to do.
Right.
It might certainly depend on who you pick, what their capabilities are.
Yeah, so I don't think this is going to be like when we pick the superintendent, when you and I go in the back room and fill in a couple of blanks. I think there has to be a discussion with the other attorney when we come up with this contract.
Well, and I don't think you need to detail every specific thing the lawyer is going to do. I think you have to give the lawyer the ability to get other lawyers to help you when that's necessary. Certainly some of these bigger firms you're talking about have more breadth of capability than I have, so they may not bring in as many outside people, but at a minimum, there has to be at least another lawyer who's involved in conflict work, and that's what I mean by that is doing the DOA hearings, et cetera, where the general counsel or the general counsel's firm can't be doing that. But I don't think there has to be a lot of different verbiage there. I would say one more thing while I'm talking, and then hopefully I won't be, but you talked about the one not to exceed an average over 3 years. And I understand that concept. What you need to think about there is, what are we averaging? Because there are all different kinds of fees. There are fees, and I tried to break those down for you some months ago, but there are fees that I do that are what I call general, which is just working with staff, coming to the board, responding to questions, et cetera. So that's one set of numbers, and we can figure out what those are. I think we have that information. Then there's another set, which is a larger set, which is all the bills that I have given you, which includes that general plus the litigation work that I do. And I do a lot of the litigation work, the personal injury kind of stuff that the board is familiar with. So that's a separate group of 3-year averages. And then there's 3-year averages of what all the lawyers do, which is a much larger number, which would include some other litigation, which in recent years has been the thing that's gone up the most. Hopefully that won't continue. Real estate, the conflict work. I mean, there's a whole list of things. So I'm just cautioning you, if we're going to get into the 3-year average, we need to know what numbers are we averaging, and that depends on what work the attorney's going to do. I mean, it has to be fair, obviously, to the lawyers, too. You can't ratchet down a small number if they're doing a lot more work. So I just throw that out if that's a direction the board is headed.
Tracy, are we doing another round?
So let's go ahead and with Mr. Edwards having 2 choices.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and see if anyone has changed, because right now, the way it looked before Mr. Edwards is we had 1 for Pearson Cohen, 2 for Shoemaker, 1 for Weiss Sarasota, and then Mr. Edwards put 1 in for Shoemaker and 1 in for Weiss. So that kind of took Pearson out, but let's go ahead and do round 2 so that we can see if anyone has changed their mind, if anyone has a different feeling or different vote. So Ms. Ziegler?
Well, and I know, appreciate you keeping us on track, but I do want to respond just from a conversational standpoint. To Mr. Edwards' points, I very much appreciate them. I think you raised a lot of the areas, particularly on the financial aspect, but the expertise, and not only we're a large enterprise, and it's not education only. We're a huge operation. We have, as we mentioned, nearly $1 billion budget. And the operational side is substantial, and that's where we tend to find a lot of the legality issues that we incur our costs. And so both firms, Shoemaker and Weiss, I think illustrated that breadth of knowledge in a large umbrella, and approach things in that proactive way. That's very much, I'm a risk management nerd, and that's the way we look at everything. You incur the funds at the beginning to offset those costs. And so as we look at billable hours, and I appreciate the Shoemaker firm reevaluating, because they were out of the ballpark financially. They're still a little bit higher. And to Mr. Hardy's point, as we're really getting down to getting a better sense of what that looks like. And I think that's going to be something that does eventually evolve. And I think within that contract, that's where those billable hours are so important. And both Weiss and Shoemaker even indicate, well, the second thing with Shoemaker, they've gotten a little bit more narrow with the $700,000 not to exceed plus or minus 5%. But I know that Weiss mentioned, after 4 months, getting a better sense of what that work entails. And that will also, as a board, help us. Maybe there are things that we want them to take over that we're currently farming out or not. I think that's just going to be something that has to evolve. So that's where those billable hours are really kind of an important area to hone in on. One thing, so I still stand very strong on Weiss. I will address some of the concerns, and Mr. Edwards, I appreciate you bringing them up, because I do think that, first of all, I think Shoemaker is a quality firm, so I want to be very clear. I know many of the people there, and I think the intellectual capital within that firm is very strong and should not be dismissed. I do have concerns. I felt it last Tuesday. I think, having been on this board, I agree, let's turn the page. It was a very challenging couple years, and I think we're moving in that right direction. I think the community is continuing to restore our faith and our confidence, and if we can avoid any unnecessary tumultuous situations, I would implore the board that we go that way without sacrificing the integrity of the quality of work of the firm that we would be hiring. Because if I look at the two, Weiss and Shoemaker, from a qualification standpoint, I think they're fair. I mean, I think there's two valuable firms that could provide a lot of value to Sarasota County Schools. I am concerned, again, I go back to what Mr. Witiski had mentioned about the demise of the quality, like the relationship of general counsel. If there is a perceived notion, whether it's a reality or not, and we, again, to my fellow board members who've been through some challenging times the last couple of years, even that perception, whether it's a reality or not, can be very, very detrimental. And so if there is a perception that there is any kind of alliances, and it may not even be true, it can erode that relationship. And I think that is a disservice to, from a fiduciary standpoint, quite frankly, to the people with whom we serve in this office. So it's for those reasons I believe strongly that I think Weiss is the right direction. I think we need to work through some of the nuances. As they mentioned, they had a colleague that would be up in Tampa that would probably be more on the administrative side, because in addition to Mr. Hardy sitting in the seat, and so that would be the gentleman, Mr. Quick, I think is his name, Quick, would be sitting in that seat and traveling, which again, I addressed, that was one of my concerns, but in their proposal they indicate, and so we have to make sure that's confirmed, that is not an additional billable cost. But what I want to be cautious of, and Mr. Hardy and I spoke about this just in general, about when we evaluate fees, and Mr. Edwards, you mentioned this too, is it has to be mutually beneficial to both the organization and the firm, so to the district. So at the end of the year, if they find that they're way underwater, or they way under bid, or what have you, which happens all the time in consulting work, that we don't want to find ourselves slapped with a substantial increase that we weren't financially prepared to do. And so that's a part where I think within the contract could probably put some language, and it may not be the not to exceed, but even if we include an annual stewardship, where they would present, whichever firm's selected, would indicate the work that they've done, the costs incurred, and kind of, so we have that barometer. I'd also say we do that on a quarterly basis at the very minimum. But again, I think I think with our superintendent, and I'm very, very pleased with him, and again, the calming waters, I've seen our district move past some, again, very rough waters. I think we have the opportunity to continue on that path. I think I appreciate you mentioning, and I'm not speaking for you, Mrs. Rose, by any means, but I did have concerns that if any member of the board, and I will include myself as one of the people who has concerns about just what will transpire if we don't make the correct selection, that I want us to all feel confident in the selection and all kind of keep rowing in the right direction if I want to be very optimistic and positive. So I appreciate you bringing those concerns up.
Thank you. Ms. Rose, your choice?
Thank you. My top choice could definitely be equally with Weiss. Would be very confident with that firm for all the reasons that have already been stated. And my issue is and continues to be with Mr. DeLeo. And I definitely see a conflict of interest with campaign contributions, supporting and opposing sitting school board members, and that does not allow trust for me. This is clearly favoritism and bias, has occurred in the past, and for me, going forward is learning from the past and not repeating it. There's been relationships of politics, questionable judgment with the encouraging the board to approve a very controversial superintendent contract, doesn't matter who the superintendent was, requiring a supermajority that threw this community into chaos and ended up in costs to taxpayers that were unnecessary. When we look at a large firm versus the model that we have had, sure, we can funnel on down the line in a large firm and ask ourselves what that expertise is, or we can go out and contract with what we consider to be the best expertise. And I'm quite sure that Shoemaker as a firm, I don't disagree with Mrs. Ziegler, that I'm sure as a firm that they hold credibility in Sarasota. But I can definitely put Weiss at the forefront of my choice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown?
You know, I talked to all of the firms, and, you know, someone local or with school experience is what rose to the top for me. And in talking with, you know, the number two, Mr. Jackson at the Lakewood Ranch firm, they're growing. They, in fact, hired a new person in January and would take on another new person if they got this contract or another one. And he said any training that they need would be on their dime, which I appreciated. But I think he also understood that, you know, they can't hit the ground running on all the issues that we need after we had the interviews. The number three firm, you know, Mr. McKinley, I think he was right on with all of his answers, but a little concerned about that it was a small firm. I talked with Mr. Bentley, or was it Bentley with Chartwell, and or Bartley rather, and you know, they definitely are more workers' comp, and he'd ask if he could be in consideration for the next workers' comp. So that kind of leads me, you know, with these three that we've seen. But I do have concerns with a firm that's not in town. They've got a firm in Tampa, but that attorney that was here would not be the one that would be representing us on a regular basis. It would be Mr. Quick, who lives down on Coral Gables. And I just have some concerns because it's not just us that he works with. He, you know, works with the board, with the superintendent, and would come down. Yes, some of those meetings could be done via Zoom, now we see. And if there is litigation that he has to take part in, he said he works with a local firm, I believe Arcade Merrill, and he rents office space there to do the investigations. But I still look at the one who checked all of my boxes would be the Shoemaker Loop firm. When somebody is local, you get to see them. And when somebody is, as strong as Mr. DeLeo is, who is so firmly supportive of our schools, yeah, he'll be out there and he'll say some things or support some people that not everyone does. But I know I have always felt that once the election is over, you close the door or you move on. And Karen ran against me. I hold no ill will towards her for that, and I, congratulated Bridget when she, won her first election. Those are two different things. But I look at the ones who understands all of the issues, and Shoemaker would have to pick up and learn more about schools, but he said those kinds of things are on their time. And I like that they do have connections with Tallahassee too, and we'll learn, although the Weiss firm, has the gal in Tampa, but the Shoemaker actually has a person that works with Tallahassee, which I think is good, especially when you're looking at the administrative code and all of those things. In your contracts, and then knowing, because our policies have to be changed. And when you've got someone that has a firm that they already have somebody up there following that kind of legislation that wouldn't necessarily be on our dime, I think would be helpful. I was particularly, again, I say it's that training issue that they say they will work with us on, because I do believe our staff, our administrators, we need training on those new policies we did. And not just on a one-time and out deal. I think we need to work at it, and we need to make sure we've got good procedures in place. We've got an issue now with a child and a teacher, and is it being done correctly? And I think by Mr. Dugan working with, being the counsel for the sheriff's office, we'll have a better understanding of what procedures we should do when it gets down to an investigation. When you've got an investigation where you have to investigate allegations against an employee on a child, that's very touchy. And I know the state says, no, wait a minute, you shouldn't be questioning the student. Let the department do it, or let the law enforcement do it. So I think there's just a lot of things that we need to look at, how we're doing them, and are we doing them correctly? And I think that we saw in a major case we had last year that investigations of harassment aren't necessarily done adequately either. And when law enforcement gets brought in and where they so I mean, I think that training part and setting up those procedures for some of these things that we come up with. And like they said, they want to be proactive and look at what we use our lawyers for, and find out if there's ways through procedures that we can lower our costs and be proactive and prevent some of these litigation issues. I think would be very beneficial. That's why I still say I like the local. I like having someone nearby. And we wouldn't have to worry about all that travel or having to take someone via Zoom rather than in person. I don't like Zoom, but I would prefer to have someone in person at the table. That's why I'm still staying with number 5 on the list, Shoemaker.
Thank you. Ms. Goodwin?
Well, I did some research on WISE with other school boards, and they're not working with Lee County. And I did not get good feedback from several school boards in South County. And I mention this because, after all, we are school boards and we are the attorneys of choice. These large school districts in the South have internal legal counsel, and they provide some other things to them, but they don't do the job that we are asking WISE to do for us. The distance is a great deal to me, and the fact that they are not part of this community is a great consideration for me. I liked some things about Pearson very much. They are local. I like Watitsky. I thought McKinley has a great grasp of school knowledge, and he's a great attorney. But for me, Shoemaker is the only option because I do not think that we would be happy with someone who is responsive from Coral Gables. And just as Mr. Edwards mentioned, giving them a call and not getting a call back, that doesn't go so well with some of our principals and our staff who might be calling for very important information very quickly. And I know his name is John Quick, but I think that Patrick Dugan would be an excellent counsel for us. Patrick Dugan knows this district. He knows this community. He grew up here. He graduated from Pineview. He has a very, very well respected by our police community as well as the sheriff's office. He understands DCF protocols. He understands many of the investigations that we be doing, and he also understands school law and parliamentary procedures. So I know we are getting stuck on Dan DeLeo, and Dan DeLeo, yes, is a friend of mine, has been for a long, long time, but Dan DeLeo is not going to be the person that would represent us on this dais and on a day-to-day basis. It would be Patrick Dugan or Connolly from Tampa that would be in working with us in conjunction. But I would say that, I don't feel the connection with the firm in Miami, and I think this is not a good decision to make. I think the other Pearson and Waltitsky and Shoemaker, I would rate ahead of them. So this for me is nothing that I'm going to change my mind on. I'm staying with Shoemaker.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Edwards, after all you've heard from your peers.
So I had great advice when I was elected, and I'll repeat it. Be true to yourself. So that I thank Tracy for accommodating the fact that I didn't fall into the box of picking one. I appreciate all of the feedback that my board members gave me, my fellow board members, to help me make a decision, and I'm prepared to make it. Your comments have certainly been helpful. So I'm going to say at this moment, Schumacher. But being true to myself, I don't know where the verbiage came from in the motion that is before us that I'm reading. And it says to authorize chair and council to begin contract negotiations. I appreciate that as a concept, but for me personally, before I can sign off and say that that's my final choice, I really would like to see the contract and before it is approved. And one last piece is I think we should really keep an open mind about how our employees continue to feel about this choice and keep an open mind about that feedback. It is the board's attorney, but I want to make sure that to the conversation that we've been discussing is that we're minimizing drama in our district. And if this still becomes an issue of drama, we might want to consider it. And to Mr. Hardy's point that we're not necessarily married, but I'd like to make sure that we're making that decision. So I still have 2 reservations, even though I'm saying yes. I'm concerned about the contract, that piece about profit and hourly rate, and making sure that it doesn't have adverse impacts within our district and our employees.
Thank you.
Tom, we have to know who we're interested in to sit down and perhaps Mr. Hardy can talk more about that. Before we get into contract negotiations, or are you saying you want to talk to, I don't know that we can go to both of them and ask for a contract.
I said Schumacher.
Yeah, he made his
All right,
choice.
okay. All right, but you will get a chance to vote on the contract. I don't get the full decision on the contract. We will work with our attorney, our current attorney, and the other firm, and the contract will be brought back, you'll get the contract, make your comments to Mr. Hardy, and he can make changes as needed and agreed to, because the contract has to be agreed to by both parties. And then when we get a contract that the firm supports, then it comes to the board, and the board votes yea or nay.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that my concerns about the contract were noted.
Yes.
And the length and connection to the firm we have to change that culture. We have to work together, and that's what I'm looking for.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Thank you.
With respect to the question, where did this language come from? I think it was, in essence, copied from the language from when the superintendent was selected. And it really is a two-step process. Today is, say, who do you want to contract with? And then we've got, at least in my opinion, we've got pretty much the contract that I've presented to you before. I can discuss that with the firm selected, and then that will come back to you for approval on the 2nd, February 2nd. So what I've heard is that the price, or the biggest blank that's left here is the compensation rate. And what I've heard, and it's different, so I want to make sure I've captured it correctly, is $275 an hour for Mr. Duggan and Mr. Connolly, and $325 an hour for everybody else?
I can forward this.
Is that?
The problem with those rates is it doesn't allow us the option to have the paralegal or somebody other than them doing the work. And I thought in discussions they were looking at.
I don't know. I mean, I've seen the
Can we say a
proposal,
not
and
to
I've heard
exceed?
what I heard today, so I just don't know.
Can we say a not to exceed?
Well, you have to have an hourly rate.
Okay.
You could have a not to exceed for the whole, I mean, there was this talk about a 3-year average, but if someone's doing work for you, you need to know what they're charging you, and they need to know what they're charging you to make sure it works for everybody. So, I mean, certainly you could have the same rate for everybody. You could have different rates depending on people's experience. You certainly, I would expect, to have a different rate for a paralegal.
Okay.
But we need to know what those are, so that's why I was trying to confirm.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead. I can turn this on.
Just for sake of, again, I appreciate everyone's comments, and I am curious just because as I hear and listen to my fellow board members, that there were more than one that had also brought forward Person, Cohen, and Mooney as an option. And I will stand by this, that at the end of the day, you should follow what you believe is right. And yes, we should try to continue to build consensus, but when push comes to shove, whenever that decision's made, then you do what's right, you believe is right. So all day long, I think the goal is to have unanimous, but obviously that doesn't always work out. With that said, I'm curious, just again, going back to what other colleagues have said, and I'm curious if, since there seems to be a division on this particular topic and such a very important role, would it be something the board would be willing to address and consider going to Person, Cohen, and Mooney? And that's something where we could all agree on, or was there reasons that that would not be a correct option?
I can agree on it.
My concern about taking them, because they would be the one that only got one vote the first time through, is that they don't have the experience with school districts.
May I speak? Madam Chair,
I'm sorry.
may I speak?
Go ahead.
I did talk to a number of city municipalities about them and got great remarks. However, in asking them, knowing that these people that I respect who are city administrators, what they thought about the work we did, they all said, no, they haven't got the experience, the parliamentary experience. They have done a lot of work with small districts within cities, like, some some mobile home districts and things like that, and they have done a lot of that work. And they do a great job, and I really enjoyed speaking with them and think they're great, but they will have to get it together. They will have to move. They will have to ramp up. And they're not ready to really do the work that I would anticipate that we would want them to do.
So they were, just for the record, I went and interviewed all 5 firms equally and had a completely open mind and looking to have my mind changed about any sort of preconceived notions that I had. When we interviewed them, I think you all heard me say, what would your plan be to ramp up? Mm-hmm. And they had none. And so to Mrs. Ziegler's point, I assessed that behavior as not proactive. So that to me was a deal breaker.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Right now, we are at 3 for Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick, and 2 for Weiss, Sarota, Healthman, Cole, Bierman.
I do have a final question, Madam Chair, if I may.
Oh, I didn't see. Okay. Bridget?
Okay. As I see that it seems that we're moving towards that the majority of the board wants to go with Shoemaker. And again, I will reiterate that the firm itself, I think, is high quality. I think there are concerns, has already come up. The one issue that, again, still remains curious to me is, first I'll say that Mr. Duggan certainly, in my mind, has, based on his background, certainly appears to have the ability to be a strong general counsel for us. What's really, in addition to some other things that have already been put forward, but what I can't really grasp is that all correspondence is coming from someone else. And so I'll just use my professional background as an example of, I work in risk management consulting world, so I certainly include my managing directors when we do presentations or RFPs or whatever, but I am that lead person. So I am that relationship with my client. I have a breadth of resources and specialty areas, but I am that key person. So even in a presentation, I am leading that presentation. I am coordinating that communication. I am concerned, or if I don't understand why all communication is coming from one party, Mr. DeLeo, when Mr. Duggan truly would be our new art. And so and I don't know if that's putting pause on anyone else, because that to me doesn't add up. And so I welcome any response to that, but that is in addition to the other concerns. To me, it doesn't feel transparent in the aspect of who are we really going to be dealing with, who is really running our, what you would call, account as a client. And I understand, again, my company is very similarly structured to something like Shoemaker, where you have different layers and you have different areas of expertise, but your lead person, who I believe, at least in the proposal that was put forward, but initially appeared that it was Mr. DeLeo, but then at the presentation, it was indicated it would be Mr. Duggan. However, Mr. Duggan, and I quite frankly feel bad for him, because he didn't get to say anything, hardly, during the public discussion, and it was dramatically led by Mr. DeLeo. In addition, even the finalization of fees that was proposed back to the board was drafted by Mr. DeLeo. So for me, again, this is, and even ironically, they mentioned this is a relationship business. Absolutely, it's a relationship business. The amount of time that we individually have to work with counsel to prepare and be proactive to something that's coming before us is important, and that relationship is key. So the way it's being presented doesn't match with at least what they're saying. And so I would need to better understand how that's sitting with the rest of the board, if that's a fair question.
My understanding is Mr. DeLeo was the one who completed the request, and that he's a partner, and I don't know that Mr. Duggan has the ability to make those broad decisions that were made in that regarding what the cost would be and capping them. But I didn't have a discussion with him regarding that. And I know that when my questions I asked about how they would handle this, I think most of mine were directed to Mr. Duggan. And it was Mr. Duggan who talked about the ability to do the training and things with us. So it was my understanding that Mr. DeLeo would be the client manager, the overall, and like if a litigation per se came up, that he didn't think there was somebody in their firm that could handle, they would go out, or they would say, Mr. Duggan, you don't have the time for this, we're going to give this to this guy who has more, and that he would be the sort of like the case manager over the school board. That was my understanding in my discussions with them. But, I don't know for sure that Mr. Duggan isn't a partner, but he's not listed on the,
I don't know
Math.
that he is a partner, but Dan is a senior member of the Shoemaker office, and he has the ability to draft proposals and change fees or get fees changed and that sort of thing. So he is more of a senior partner, and I think that's why he was there. I think our day-to-day operation would be Patrick Dugan and Mike Connolly from Tampa, if need be, and then the other areas of interest that we've talked about, the other specialties. You know that in employment law, Jennifer Compton is well-known and probably one of the top employment attorneys in the country. And so they have the expertise in this office and in other offices to help, and I think Dan is more of the senior partner who's representing that, and that's why he made the presentation.
So I'm understanding that we have the opportunity to vote on a final contract, and I've done as much as I'm prepared to do to change out contacts from the firm, whether that's Dan DeLeo or Patrick Duggan. I've provided for that already, and that's all I'll say on that matter.
so I guess we're looking for a motion.
I move that the board offer the position of School Board General Counsel to Shoemaker Loop and authorize the chair and counsel to begin contract negotiations.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Ms. Ziegler.
Well, again, I want to thank all of the applicants and people who are interested, and I want to thank the board for the conversation. I do, as reiterated before, I think this position is a very significant one that this district hasn't had to replace in a very long time, and also I'd be remiss if I did not genuinely thank Mr. Hardy for his years of service, quite frankly, through some incredibly rocky times, and your balanced approach has been very impressionable to me, and that's why looking through all of this, that is the approach that I took, as I think it is no easy position for a superintendent or a general counsel to deal with dynamic personalities of 5 in an elected board, and to keep that focus and stay, keep your moral and ethics in check to do what's best for the district, and that is what you have done. And so as I evaluated that, I do have concerns, as have been raised. I care so deeply for this district, and I, again, believe we have turned a very positive page, and I fear that we are going backwards. And to Mr. Edwards' point, I agree. Listen, having been on this board for 6 years, there have been some tough times, and I have come back every single day and brush off the dust and keep focused. And so disagreements can happen, absolutely. I don't hold resentment by any means in the past, because we have to move forward. What I think alarms me even more, though, as we went through this process, that similar tactics and behaviors demonstrated themselves right here in this very room, and even continued so. That, again, gave me pause. So it wasn't more about what happened in the past, it was currently happening. And I very much appreciate the due diligence that you've done and that the entire board has done. And again, I can't reiterate that from a professional standpoint, I think Shoemaker as a firm is a very qualified firm. I just have serious reservations about the current the likely disruption or mistrust that this relationship will be starting. And I will put a good forward effort on no matter who it is, but I have to do what I believe is right, and I will not be supporting this motion.
Karen?
I too would like to recognize Mr. Hardy over the 3 decades I've been involved in this district, and your impeccable objectivity and integrity will be quite a challenge for anyone who comes and supports this board, and I commend you for that, and have incredible respect for you, and ultimately hate to see you go. I will not be able to support the motion. I've stated my reasons why. Going forward is learning from the past and not repeating it. I wouldn't bring this up, Madam Chair. I don't hold any ill will. My focus is children. My focus is supporting instruction and getting into the business of high-quality schools and customer service for all of our families, and focusing in on and prioritizing our teachers and our staff that are our primary builders of quality schools. I want to reiterate that I'm sure that Shoemaker is a quality firm, and I want to repeat, I have never indicated that I have an issue with Mr. Duggan in any way, fashion, or form. My issue is and remains with Mr. DeLeo, and it is a very objective piece. I'm stating facts of contributions, supporting and opposing sitting school board members, for me, does not allow trust and clearly equals favoritism and bias. And that history is a problem for me. And the judgment calls that highly impacted the perception of our community on this board with the controversial superintendent contract requiring a supermajority and Mr. DeLeo's encouragement of that. So I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
I would hope that, we try to go past the 3-2 votes and look for ways to move forward. I think that we need to do what's in the best interest of the school district. Mr. DeLeo has said that he will refrain from school board getting involved in any school board elections in the future, except for the referendum, the support for that. And I would think that Mr. Dugan would do the same, because I do believe, yes, that it causes problems. But they have said they will move past that. I think we've got 2 good firms in front of us. We've got a local firm that has some issues with past contributions and positions, and we've got another firm that's down in Dade County. And I talked with Mr. Quick, and he said he would be the one that would be representing us. And I don't feel good about having somebody in Dade County representing Sarasota County Schools. I just think that the local issue overrides that. I think that if we do see that there is a conflict with the next election coming up, that we surely can rescind the contract. But I think that the way the public works with, because everyone has the right to support candidates. And if you're involved in your school district and you care very much about your school district, that you spend hours, helping on a referendum, it's only fair that they would want to support candidates. But we've got a discussion with Mr. DeLeo, and he said he will refrain from doing that in the future. And will ask his partners to too. A free country, First Amendment, and all of that. But we would try to, so that they would no longer get involved in politics except for the referendum. And I think the local issue overrides that, and I really would like us to pull together as a board. We can see we've got 3-2, but I would like to move past the 3-2 and say that, yes, we're willing to work at this. We're willing to give it a try. I will try to work with this firm. And that's what a 5-0 vote would mean. We know where it's going, and because as a board, we should work together. And it's not favoritism over any past actions. It's what's before us today on the type of work that they are able to do, willing to do, and that they're willing to work with us to make sure that the rates don't exceed what they've been, that they're willing to work with us to give us the best representation that we can get, and willing to work with us at looking at our costs and how we handle our legal things, being proactive, and also on the training issues. I think those things more than outweigh a firm that has some mixed reviews, but is down in Dade County. I was very impressed with Ms. Johnson from Tampa, but she would not be our main person. It would be Mr. Quick from Dade. That's what he told me yesterday, and I just don't want somebody from Dade County representing Sarasota. Ms. Goodwin.
Well, I want to thank Art Hardy. I want to thank Lamar Matthews, the original Matthews Eastmore, and then even before that, I think, because, Lamar was here in the pioneer days, I think.
Since 1986, yes.
And I love and respect him and love and respect you, and want you to go forward with your life and, have a great time. You're always welcome back here. You can always come back and help us with things. I mean, you've been a giant in terms of school law. When we first started looking at these replacements, I talked to Leonard Dietzen in Tallahassee, who I consider to be a pretty smart guy. And he said, oh, no, Art's not leaving. And, I asked him to look over the list of the people that we were looking at, because I go around and, check things out. And he said, I know that Shoemaker is really great, but you may have a hard time with that one because of some situations. And I said, well, you have to do what's right. You have to do what's right. Anything that's mentioned about the contract, that was me. Put the blame on me. I originated that contract, and I had reasons why it could have been negotiated. Some of those issues could have been negotiated out at the board. Although the chairman of the board creates it, other people can modify it. It's called negotiations. So I will just say I had my reasons. I thought they were right, and it certainly was done with a humble servant wanting things to be better than they were. But I think that Shoemaker is the right firm for us. If we had sent this request out, maybe other than December 15th, which had to be a pretty hard time, maybe we would have had other representatives of other larger firms in this community that we would have been looking at, that we are not looking at now. And of course, I really believe in buy local. Whatever it is, somebody in Miami and Coral Gables does not really understand Sarasota County as I think Shoemaker and Patrick Dugan will. So I'm excited about being in support of this, and want to thank everybody on this board for all the hard work that I know you've done, because it took some time to really get in touch with some of these people and find out all this information. So thank you.
Mr. Edwards.
So being new to the board, I'm not saying goodbye to Mr. Hardy. I'm saying so long. And the reason being is he's been great counsel to me since our relationship began the night of my election, and right through this process. So I will continue to be advised by Mr. Hardy as we navigate these waters. I just want to say for the record that I don't think there's a person in this room or on this dais that doesn't believe that we're all making our decisions thoughtful and mindful for the best interest of the district and the kids. So having said that, I want to thank all of the board members for, I know how much time I put into this, and every one of my decisions is transparent. I share openly and honestly my concerns. I shared openly and honestly my concerns about Schumacher. I am reserving judgment on Schumacher depending upon how the relationship goes. Having said that, there's no hidden agenda here. I believe that is the best decision that I can make based upon the 5 firms and all of the comments that my fellow board members gave to help me get to that decision. So I just want to make sure that everyone hears my appreciation for their thoughtful and kind deliberation.
So it's been moved and seconded. It's ready to vote. I'm not seeing the vote panel up.
Oh, maybe not.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
So the motion passes 3-2. We stand in recess for an executive session.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I may, the board will be recessing now to go into a litigation meeting in the case of Jimenez Ruiz versus the school board. Excuse me. Present at the litigation meeting will be the 5 board members, myself, the superintendent, special counsel Richard McCray, and of course the court reporter. We will be doing that in room 315 in the green awning. At the conclusion of the litigation meeting, the board will reopen this meeting simply for the purpose of adjourning it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sent me a note saying they were going to send me another note.
So you still don't have an
So I still don't have an appointment. I don't know if I'm going to have to fight for it.